I've made a lot of bad decisions in 54 years. Checking my work email on the second morning of my honeymoon might be the one that accidentally saved my career. My name is Wade Ellison. I'm 54. For 8 years, I was the Senior Client Relations Director at Prescott Capital Advisors in Chicago. And on that second morning in Maui, standing on the lanai with the ocean going flat and stupid-looking beautiful in every direction, I found out I no longer worked there. Sloan was still asleep inside. We'd been married exactly 9 days. I don't know why I opened the app. Habit. 28 years of never fully switching off. The subject line read, Personnel Update, Position Elimination. Not my name, not even a department. Just personnel update like I was a line item getting deleted from a spreadsheet. The email was 61 words. I counted. Dear Wade, effective immediately, your position at Prescott Capital Advisors has been eliminated due to departmental restructuring. Your final paycheck, including 2 weeks severance, will be deposited on the regular schedule. Please coordinate with IT regarding return of company property upon your return. Nolan Prescott, Chief Executive Officer. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the railing and looked at the ocean. I'm not going to tell you I broke down. I didn't. I just got very still. There's a version of this story where I immediately started making calls and working the problem. That's not what happened. I stood there for about 20 minutes and looked at the water and thought about the fact that it was Monday morning, 6:47 a.m. Chicago time, and Nolan had sent that email and probably gone to get coffee. Sloan found me out there. She took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" I handed her the phone. She read it, set it down on the railing. Didn't say anything for a moment then. After 8 years, that's all he gave you. I nodded. She put the phone back in my hand and said, "Don't call anyone yet. Come have breakfast." So I did. We ate. She talked. I was present for maybe 40% of it. That night alone on the lanai after Sloan went to sleep, I almost did something I'd regret. I opened a new email, typed Nolan's address, and started writing. Something professional, something that said I was willing to discuss the situation. Something that was basically asking for my job back without using those exact words. I stared at it for a while, then I deleted it. Not because I had a plan, I didn't have a plan yet. I deleted it because I realized the man who would send that email had been making the same mistake for 8 years. Treating loyalty to a company like it was the same thing as loyalty to himself. By the time I went to bed, I hadn't called anyone, but I'd stopped wanting to. The next morning, I turned the phone back on. In the 4 hours since that email went out, I had 22 unread texts, 14 missed calls, and more voicemails than I bothered counting. The first text was from Cole Mercer, my assistant of 6 years. Wade, what is going on? Clients are calling the main line. Nolan looks like he's going to have a heart attack. Call me. The second was from Reese Dalton in legal. The board didn't approve this. Reed is furious. This is going to get ugly fast. Also, I checked your contract this morning. No enforceable non-compete. Termination without cause voids what's left. You're clear. I read that second text twice. Then one from Drew Langley in client services. 47 of our biggest accounts are threatening to pull out unless you come back. They're saying they only signed because of you personally. Nolan is in full meltdown. What do you want us to do? 47 accounts. I did the math fast. That was over $420 million in assets under management, more than 60% of our high-value portfolio. Walking out the door, I set the phone down on the breakfast table. Sloan looked at me. How bad? He may have just handed me everything, I said. Let me back up so this makes sense. Prescott Capital was founded 22 years ago by 2 guys who understood what wealthy clients actually needed. Not just portfolio performance, someone who picked up the phone. Reed Holloway was one of them. He built the client side of the business from scratch. When he brought me on 8 years ago, I understood exactly what he'd built and why it worked. The other co-founder was Gerald Prescott. Gerald died 4 years ago. His son Nolan inherited the CEO title along with the corner office and the golf club membership, but not much else of what made Gerald good at the job. Ride had been stepping back for about a year, recovering from a heart surgery he downplayed to everyone, including his own board. Semi-retired was the official story. The truth was he'd handed too much day-to-day control to Nolan and hadn't been watching closely enough. Nolan was a systems guy. His idea of improving the business was finding ways to reduce what he called relationship overhead, translated from corporate speak. That meant he thought I spent too much time on individual clients. What he didn't understand is that our clients weren't paying us because of our software platform. They were paying because someone they trusted answered when they called. That's it. That's the whole business. About a year before the honeymoon, Nolan brought in his niece, Lacey Prescott. Fresh MBA, 28 years old, sharp in a theoretical way. He announced she'd be shadowing senior staff. Within 6 months, she was being positioned as my eventual replacement. I could see it coming. I just didn't think he'd move while I was in Hawaii. The final straw had been 3 weeks before the wedding. Nolan called me in and told me he was reassigning my largest account to Lacey. Flynn Donovan, a hedge fund manager I'd brought over from my previous firm, nearly 11 years total, $38 million portfolio. A guy who called me directly before he called anyone else. I told Nolan straight, Flynn is not going to accept that transition. Nolan said, and I'm quoting exactly, "Clients adapt. I left that meeting knowing things were coming to a head. I figured I'd deal with it when I got back from the honeymoon. Have a real conversation like two adults." Nolan didn't wait. So there I was in Maui with $420 million worth of client relationships, suddenly in motion, and a legal confirmation from Reese that I had no enforceable restrictions stopping me from doing anything I wanted next. I called Cole first. "It's complete chaos," he said. His voice was low, like he was in a closet somewhere. Knowing Cole, he probably was. "Nolan announced your termination in the Monday morning meeting like it was a staffing update. By noon the phone started. Donovan called first, then the Stafford account, then the Fielding family, then it was like every client we had got on a group text. What are they saying exactly?" I asked. "That they'll pull their money if you're not reinstated." Word for word from Flynn Donovan. "I don't pay management fees to talk to someone who doesn't know my name?" I asked Cole what that meant. Turns out Lacey had already been making introductory calls to my client list. On her second call to Flynn Donovan, she called him Mr. Davidson. He corrected her. She apologized, used the right name for the rest of the call, then said she looked forward to working with him and called him Mr. Davidson again before hanging up. Flynn Donovan had a transfer of assets request sitting with his attorney within the hour. I asked Cole if Reed Holloway had come in. "He's been here since 8 a.m., Cole said. "First time in months, he's in the conference room with 2 board members right now. There's talk of an emergency vote." Wade? I don't think Nolan understood what he was sitting on. No, he didn't. I spent the rest of that morning returning client calls, not as a Prescott employee, just as Wade, the guy they'd been working with for years, letting them know I was aware of the situation and working on something. I didn't say I was coming back to Prescott. I didn't say I wasn't. I just listened and let them talk. What I heard over and over in different words from different people was the same thing. They hadn't signed with a firm. They'd signed with me. The Prescott name on the letterhead was incidental. The relationship was the product. And Nolan had just tried to swap out the product without telling the customers. That evening, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Wade, this is Reed. Please call me on this personal number. Tonight, if possible." Sloan read it over my shoulder. "You gonna call him?" The old version of me would have called back within 60 seconds, would have been grateful just to be acknowledged. "Not yet," I said. She looked at me for a moment without saying anything. "What do you actually want here?" she asked. I looked out at the water. It was getting dark, a few lights from boats on the horizon. I want to stop asking that question and actually answer it. I said. Sloan was quiet. Then she said the thing she'd been holding back since breakfast the day before. "Wade, when are you going to stop building houses for other people?" I didn't answer that night, but that sentence didn't leave me either. We stayed up past midnight with a legal pad and most of a bottle of scotch. I ran numbers. She asked questions. Somewhere around 1 a.m., she looked across the table and said, "You've basically been running your own business inside their building for 8 years. You just weren't billing yourself for it." That was the moment everything shifted. Not a dramatic moment, not a speech. Just a number on a legal pad and the slow realization that the thing I'd been waiting to do someday had a start date now, whether I'd chosen it or not. I called Reed the next morning, Boston business hours. He picked up on the first ring. "Thank God," Reed said. "I've been trying to contain this since yesterday morning. Walk me through what happened," I said. Nolan acted unilaterally. No board approval, no HR process, nothing. He sent that email and went to lunch. Reed's voice was tight. He told the board afterward that your compensation had become unsustainable and that Lacey could maintain your client book at 60% of the cost. I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. "How is that calculation working out so far?" A long pause. "Flynn Donovan's attorney called yesterday afternoon, $38 million initiating transfer. The Stafford account is on hold pending review. The Fielding family sent a formal letter this morning. We're looking at losing over $400 million in assets if this doesn't get resolved in the next few days. I appreciate you telling me, Reed," I said, "but I need you to understand something. Even if the board votes to reinstate me, I'm not sure I want to walk back into a company where the CEO can terminate me on my honeymoon with a 61-word form email and no cause, no call, nothing. Silence on the line. Long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. "What would it take?" he finally asked. Smart man, went straight to the question that mattered. "I'll tell you when I'm back in Chicago," I said. Until then, I'd suggest finding a way to slow the outflow. Wade, we don't have that kind of time. Then I suggest you find it, I said. Because I'm not cutting my honeymoon short to fix Nolan's mistake. After I hung up, Sloan raised an eyebrow at me from across the table. You just told Reed Holloway to wait. I did. Who are you? She said. But she was smiling. I won't pretend the rest of the honeymoon was fully relaxed. Every morning I spent an hour on the phone, but every afternoon I put it down. What I was doing during those morning calls wasn't angling for reinstatement. I was just being present for people who were worried, listening, letting them know the situation was being handled. I never said I was coming back to Prescott. I never said I wasn't. I just made sure they knew I hadn't disappeared. What I was actually doing in the background was building. By day 5, Reed texted that the board had voted 2-1 to offer me my position back. Nolan opposed, of course he did. By day 6, I had a call with an attorney in Chicago about filing an LLC. We did it remotely while I was still in Maui. The paperwork took about 45 minutes. By day 7, I had informal commitments from clients representing just over $420 million in assets, contingent on whatever structure came next. By day 8, Ellison Wealth Group LLC existed on paper. On day 9, sitting on that same lanai where I'd read the termination email a week earlier, I drafted individual messages to each of my 47 clients, not a mass email, each one addressed by name, referencing something specific to their situation. I didn't send them, not yet, but they were ready. I wore a jacket to that meeting. Not a suit, a jacket and slacks. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to close something. The conference room was on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, harbor view, the kind of room designed to make clients feel like they'd made the right choice. All 3 board members were present, Reed Holloway at the far end of the table, and a woman I didn't recognize with a legal pad and a carefully neutral expression. PR handler. Obviously, Nolan stood when I walked in and extended his hand, like we were being introduced for the first time. I shook it and sat down without saying anything. He opened with a prepared statement. He acknowledged that the timing and method of my termination had been, his word, unfortunate. He said the communication was impersonal and that he apologized for that. I let the word unfortunate sit in the air for a moment. How are the client retention numbers looking this week, Nolan? I asked. Nobody answered. He pushed forward. New title. Executive Client Relations Director, direct board reporting, bypassing him entirely, 18% compensation increase, expanded equity package. The PR woman nodded at each point like she was grading a performance. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and slid copies across the table to each person in the room. The cover page read, Ellison Wealth Group LLC, Proposed Transition Partnership. Reed picked his up immediately and started reading. The PR woman stopped writing. One of the other board members leaned forward. Nolan stared at the cover page. You already filed. Last week, I said, remotely, while we were still in Maui. The room was quiet. You planned this from the beginning, he said. His voice had gone flat. No, I said, you planned this. I responded to it. I kept my tone even, no edge in it. I have commitments from clients representing $420 million in assets. Those relationships exist because of 8 years of work. They don't belong to a logo or a letterhead. Nolan, you tried to transfer something that was never transferable. Lacey called Flynn Donovan the wrong name twice in one phone call. That's not a transition problem. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of what this business actually is. Nolan's jaw tightened. The PR woman had completely stopped taking notes. Reed looked up from the document. Walk us through the structure. I did. Ellison Wealth Group operates as an independent firm. Prescott Capital takes a minority equity stake. The client transition happens in an organized, professional way that protects both books of business. Nobody gets hurt more than necessary. Nobody has to explain to regulators why $400 million moved in a disorderly way over 2 weeks. Alternatively, I said, 47 clients transfer their assets on their own timeline. Prescott gets nothing from any of it, and someone has to explain to the full board why this happened. I closed my folder. You have 48 hours, I said. After that, I send my client announcements directly. The board came back in 36 hours, faster than I expected. They approved the partnership structure with one modification. They wanted 25% equity in Ellison Wealth Group. I countered at 20%. We went back and forth twice. Settled at 22%. Nolan was not in that second meeting. He sent a representative instead. That told me everything about where things stood internally. The paperwork took another week to finalize. During that time, I kept my client communications steady and calm. No drama, no victory lap. Just clear information about the transition timeline and what it meant for each account. people appreciate that more than anything. They don't need excitement from the person managing their retirement. Nolan resigned 6 weeks after the partnership was signed. The press release said he was pursuing new opportunities. Nobody at the firm seemed surprised. Lacey quietly returned to the East Coast not long after. Ride Holloway came back in a more active capacity, working with the restructured board to stabilize what was left of the Prescott book. I heard through Cole that Nolan's official position internally had been that my client relationships were a liability, not an asset, that they created too much dependency on a single person. That standardizing the approach would make the firm more scalable. What he never accounted for was that the clients themselves had a vote. Moving into our own offices was a low-key day. Smaller space than Prescott, but same view of the harbor, which felt like the right kind of continuity. Cole was there from day one. Reese Dalton joined about 3 months later. Drew Langley came on board at the 6-month mark. Good people who understood what we were building and why. The first morning I walked in and saw the name on the door, I stopped for a second. Just stood there in the hallway. Ellison Wealth Group. My name, not a family name I'd inherited, not a brand someone else built, mine in the sense that matters. I had earned what that name represented, client by client, call by call, over the better part of 2 decades. Sloan had driven me in that morning. She walked up beside me, looked at the door and said nothing, just put her hand on my arm for a moment. That was enough. 18 months in, Ellison Wealth Group manages just over $480 million. The additional $60 million came from referrals, existing clients bringing in family members and business partners, which is how this business has always grown when you do it right. We have 47 core clients and a small number of newer relationships that came through word of mouth. I work the same hours I always did. The difference is that every late night and every early morning call now has a different weight to it. It's mine. Last month, Reed and I had lunch at a place near the water. He looked better than he had in a couple of years. Color back in his face, moving without the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain. He raised his glass and said, "I'm sorry it happened the way it did." I told him I wasn't, and I meant that. Not in a performative way, not as a line. I genuinely am not sorry, because here's the honest truth. I had been thinking about doing exactly this for years, building something of my own. I told myself I'd get around to it eventually. After 60, when things slowed down, when the timing was better, there was always a reason to wait, and I was always ready to accept it. Nolan Prescott thought he was removing a cost center. What he actually did was remove my last excuse. That's the part I couldn't have planned. You can want something for years and still find a reason not to move toward it. Sometimes the move happens because someone else forces the issue. Sometimes the door you needed to walk through only opens because someone shoved you from behind. I'm not saying go looking for the shove. I'm not saying betrayal is some kind of gift. What Nolan did was short-sighted, and it cost a lot of people a lot of unnecessary stress. I'm not grateful to him. I don't think about him much at all, which is probably the most honest version of how that ends. What I'm saying is this. If you have been sitting on something telling yourself you'll get to it when the timing is right, when the kids are through school, when you've got a little more saved, when things settle down at work, the timing is probably never going to feel right. That's not pessimism. That's just how it goes. You already know what you're capable of. You've been proving it for someone else for a long time. At some point, the question becomes whether you're willing to prove it for yourself. I checked my work email on the second morning of my honeymoon and found out I'd been fired. And sitting on that lanai in Maui with $420 million worth of client relationships suddenly in motion and no contract holding me in place, I finally stopped asking myself when I was going to be ready. Turns out I'd been ready for years. I just needed someone to take away the building I'd been working in. So whatever the thing is for you, the business, the move, the change you keep putting in the someday pile, you've already done the hard part. You've built the skills. You've built the relationships. You've built the credibility. The only thing left is to build it for yourself.